Okay. Now I know you love this. So far, any formula that you found difficult? Because I want that as you are done with this class, or if you're listening to this recording, when you're done with this recording, just know the formulas. So do you know the formula for residual income so far? Okay, and then you know the formula for valuation using the residual income model? Okay, so this is so everybody knows this so far, right? We've already done this. So the value of a company is the initial book value plus the present value of all your future residual incomes. What is this? Yeah, this is your basic. This is simply another way of writing your ROE is equal to, just need to make sure that E represents earnings. So ROE is earnings at time T divided by the book value at the start of the year. So notice these formulas are using the book value at the start of the year rather than average book value. Okay, so from this you can see that earnings is equal to ROE into the book value at the start of the year. So what have we done? We've simply taken this, replaced the earnings with ROE. So replace the earnings number with ROE into book value. So this in the circle has been replaced by this rectangle. Then that formula becomes this. So can you memorize this? Either memorize it or as in see the derivation and then memorize it. I'll help you memorize this now. Okay. Now, are you creating value if the ROE, the return on equity, is equal to the cost of equity? Yeah. So if ROE, the return that you are getting, is the same as your cost, then what do you think the residual income will be? Zero. Okay. So that's exactly what's given over here. No matter how big your book value, but if your return is equal to your cost of equity, if they are equal, you are not generating value. When do you generate value? When ROE is greater than the cost of equity. So all you are doing over here is now memorizing. In general, with all your residual income model formulas, you start out with the initial book value. So then what are you adding? You are, for every year, you are looking at the ROE minus cost of equity multiplied by the starting book value. So that effectively, this is another way of writing your residual income. Okay, so residual income can also be written as your ROE minus the cost of equity for a given year multiplied by the book value at the start of the year. Okay, so they are just, so now you've learnt a third way of coming up with your residual income. What were the other two ways? So just to put them all on one page, what was the first way of coming up with residual income? Yeah, it was net income minus cost of equity into the beginning book value. What was the second way? It was NOPAT minus the WACC times the total capital. And now you have your third way, which is your ROE minus the cost of equity multiplied by the book value. So make sure you remember these, and then that's just summarized down here. Okay, so the question is, don't we calculate ROE based on average book value? The answer is that the calculation of ROE is done in different ways in different contexts. In the context, and even if you look at the formula in textbooks, different textbooks, some will use average, some will use start of year. In the context of residual income, we use the equity at the start of the year because you are looking at what is the return over the year that you are generating on equity invested at the start of the year. Okay, so in general with the RIM model, residual income model, think of equity as equity at the start of the year. And also, if you ever look at a ROE number, you should just look underneath the number and see, is the assumption equity at the start of the year or equity average? Okay, so do example 4 now. Or just look at it. The answer is done for you, but I just want you to think through this. Okay, so all we are doing here is simply using the formula that we just learned. So the value of a company is the initial book value plus the present value of ROE minus R into initial book value over 1 plus R. So the initial book value is the same as what it was before. What does 1.4 represent? Yeah, this is just another way of calculating the residual income that has been done by looking at ROE for that year minus the cost of equity into the initial book value. So I hope you recognize the fact that this is not difficult, just need to practice this. Okay. Now from the last class you might also recall this. All we are saying here is, if we, up till now what have we said? Up till now we have said that the value of a firm is the initial book value plus the present value of all the residual incomes in the future. Now if we make a Gordon growth model sort of assumption here, what's that Gordon growth model assumption? Yeah, that we are assuming constant growth. If we can assume constant growth with dividends and free cash flows, why can't we do the same with residual income? Okay, so this should look familiar. I will if you want, you can go through the derivation, but what I want you to look at fundamentally is just memorize this. Later on, if you spend some time on this, you can just figure it out. But this should look familiar. The value of a firm, assuming constant growth for earnings and dividends, is the initial book value plus ROE minus R into B naught over R minus G. So just stare at this hard enough and memorize it. Just think of this as the residual income equivalent of the Gordon growth model. How can you have you memorized the fact that it's always going to be ROE minus R? Otherwise it would not make sense. You also memorize, the other way to remember this is, if these are equal, then the value is simply the same as book value, and the rest, R minus G you can't forget, and it's all based on the initial book value. Okay, this is a quick practice to see if you just remembered that. Okay, so this is fairly straightforward. You have your initial book value is given, ROE is given, cost of equity is given, R minus G into your initial book value. So it's not hard, but still I think a number of people here had issues, so that just proves that you need practice. Otherwise the formula is straightforward, the numbers are given, and key on the exam will be to just pull out the relevant numbers. Okay, this is explicitly this is a learning objective that you should be able to estimate the implied growth rate. Does this look familiar? So if you already know the market price, based on the market price, can you derive the implied growth rate? So again, they've just mentioned this as one specific learning objective, so there is no rocket science here, so I just gave you that example. Okay, now if you are not seeing a pattern here, then there is an issue. Okay, because in all these, a lot of people complain about the number of formulas, but if you actually, once you practice this, then you will notice that all this material in a nice way seems to come together. Okay, the same theme, there's a common thread through all of this. Okay, so what is multi-stage residual income model? Take a wild guess how this will work. It is all based on, the only addition with residual income is you have your initial book value and then you are adding up. Can you apply an H model over here? You can apply all the models you studied before, you can apply over here. They don't explicitly talk about the H model, but what are they talking about here? They are saying that for a few years you have some growth rate. So let's say you have high growth rate for 4 years. So then for t is equal to 1 to t is equal to 4, you take out the individual residual incomes and discount that back. Okay, and then at the end of year 4, for all subsequent value created, you just take the estimated price of the stock at time t minus the book value at time t. So this is a measure of your residual income from time t onwards. So you are saying that all the residual income from time t onwards, that is captured in this term, in the price of the stock minus the book value at that time. So this is at time t. So you take the P minus B at that time and discount it back. Okay, this is effectively like the terminal value. The interpretation is the premium over, so this PT minus BT is called the premium over book value at, at the end of our time horizon, which is time t. Now can this be written like this? Does this look familiar? All we are doing is saying that this is one way of calculating residual income. This is another way of calculating residual income. The question is, does this capture price appreciation? Actually, the way you think about this is a residual income model. So the concept of residual income model is you are discounting back all the residual incomes and adding it to the current book value. So don't think in terms of price appreciation, just think in terms of think of this as your premium due to all the residual income that is coming in the future. And if there is a lot of residual income in the future, that will create the price appreciation. Alright, so we are continuing with the residual income model, and effectively what we've done so far is said residual income is equal to the value of a company is equal to initial book value plus the present value of all the residual incomes in the future. We first looked at a system where it was simply B naught plus the residual income in year 1 discounted back plus residual income in year 2 discounted back, and so on. Then in the second one, we also included some sort of premium at time t, and then discounted that 1 plus r to the power of t. Okay, so now this was an abrupt stop. Okay, so most things in life and in the CFA do not always abruptly end. Okay, so as you can imagine, with something like the H model, there is a situation where the residual income maybe is at certain high level. What do you think in the long run, based on what you studied in level 1 economics, in the long run, what happens to the profits of a company? Do profits become zero? No. Yeah, exactly. The economic profit in the long run is zero. Now, do you see an analogy? Economic profit equals zero effectively means residual income is zero. Right? So economic profit zero meant that after you remove all your opportunity costs, and the major opportunity cost in this context is what? The cost of capital. So effectively what we are saying is that in the long run, what will happen to ROE minus R? This will become zero. It doesn't mean that ROE will become zero. It just means that in the long run, this will become zero. So what will happen to residual income in the long run? So effectively in the long run, residual income will become zero. So now if you have a model where you assume that after 4 years, you have some non-zero residual income. Okay, let's say you have a residual income of whatever, just pick a number, 50. Then is it fair to say that you can make an assumption that this residual income of 50 will over a certain number of years fade down to zero? Okay, is that logical? So if that is logical, then there must be some parameter that defines how fast this fading happens. Either the fading away to zero happens over a long time, or it might happen fast. Okay, and you are used to this by now. There is this Greek symbol, I don't know what this is called in Greek, but let's just call it a curly W. So this curly, what's this? Does anybody know? Okay, anyway, so we'll call it a curly W, is a measure of the persistence. Okay, so we are now going to enhance our formulas and talk about this curly W, which is a measure This is a measure of how long or how quickly the ROE moves from its current value or whatever value at this year down to 0. And rather than getting too hung up with this, I just want you to learn the formula and then understand the interpretation of W and learn how to use the formula. So the value of a company, again, you can now think of it as value of a company has 3 parts. What's the first part? Book value. And then you have, what is all this? This is the present value of all your residuals for the years that you are clearly forecasting discrete values or values of your residual income till year T minus 1. And then we are saying that from year T onwards, what will happen to the residual income? It will slowly drift down. Okay, now what does the W mean? This W is actually called a persistence parameter, and this will invariably be given to you. Now, if this persistence parameter is equal to 1, okay, what does that mean? So I'll just work through this example and then show you exactly how to interpret this. So we have an example where the analyst extends her analysis to consider the possibility that ROE will slowly decay towards R in 2027 and beyond, rather than using a perpetuity year of 2026 residual income. So he estimates a persistence parameter of 0.6. So if you are given this persistence parameter, all you are doing is plugging that persistence parameter where this W is. So that's your persistence parameter. So this particular number is the value of the residual income at the end of, so I'll just make a simple model for you. Let me just clean things up and show you how to work this. Okay, if you have this sort of a model, so this is year 0, this is year T minus 1, and this is year T. So this is book node, you know this. This is the present value of all the residual incomes up to this point. Okay, then what this is doing is this is saying that the residual income over here, and then as this slowly comes down to 0, so all these residual incomes, their present value at time T minus 1 is given by this formula. And then if you have a value over here, how do you discount this back to 0? You divide by 1 plus R to the power of T minus 1. Okay, now you need to also know the interpretation of this persistence equal to 0 versus a persistence equal to 1. If the persistence is equal to 0, this implies that for some reason this company has a competitive advantage and the residual income will stay on for perpetuity. Does this remind you of if this is 1, then you have 1 plus R minus 1, so you have the residual income over R, which is like a perpetuity formula, or it is a perpetuity formula, a perpetuity of the residual income. Is it possible that this happens? Unlikely, but possible. So if you can imagine a monopoly or some company that has some competitive advantage, if the competitive advantage exists, then will the residual income go to 0? No. So this is an extreme case where W is equal to 1. So this means great persistence. Okay. Whereas what does this persistence equal to 0 mean? This means that you are immediately, so 0 means over 1 plus R. This means that you'll have residual income over here, and you just discount it back one period. After that, there is no more residual income. But reality will be somewhere in between. So that in between number is given by the 0.6. So a high number so which company will have a higher competitive advantage? One with a high persistence or low persistence? Yeah, so high persistence, so this term is appropriate. So high persistence means that the residual income will stay on for longer, and then this component of value will be relatively high. So can you memorize this formula? So is the residual, if you just have this framework in mind, I hope you can, as in, it's not a hope, you have to memorize this. Okay, so just do it. And then you'll be given all the numbers, you just need to plug and play. Okay, though I'll tell you this, that I think compared to everything else we've studied, this is relatively lower probability, but all you need to remember is this persistence factor. And it's logical enough, I hope. Okay. So now, if you get a question on residual income, half the questions are likely to require calculations. The other half will be questions around what's good about this, what's bad about this. So let's get into the good and bad. Okay. So what are the strengths? As we have alluded to before, so now we are on section 4 of the curriculum, by the way. So the strengths, and I'm just taking the core points, I'm not taking every single item. Okay, strengths are that the terminal value does not make up a large portion of the present value. So unlike most of the discounted cash flow models where the terminal value is a significant component of the value of a company, in the residual income model, the terminal value, which comes up with a lot of, which you arrive at based on lots of assumptions and forecasts, that is a relatively small part of the value that you are calculating. Residual income models use readily available accounting data. Okay. It can be applied to non-dividend paying companies or those which have negative cash flows. Okay. And it has an appealing focus on economic profitability. Okay, so we already talked about the concept of economic profit. So economists would call it economic profit, and people doing this reading would call the same thing roughly residual income. What are weaknesses? The accounting data is prone to manipulation by management. So the classic issues with quality of earnings and so on. So if you are not using good accounting numbers, then that obviously means that your valuation is susceptible to the assumptions made by management. Significant adjustments to accounting data may be needed. So there is a workaround to this. You've studied in FRA all the stuff that you learned about the adjustments that can be made. You can apply them here. We assume that clean surplus holds when we do residual income, but if it doesn't hold, then that's an issue. So again, you will have to make assumptions. Assumes that cost of debt is reflected by the interest expense. What's the point here? The point here is when you do the model net income minus cost of equity into the book value at time t minus 1. When you do this, the assumption over here is you've already taken into account cost of debt. And what have you assumed about the cost of debt? That it is simply interest that has been paid in the past. Strictly speaking, what's the cost of debt? Strictly speaking, you should look at the marginal cost of debt, which should be the rate that you would pay for any new bonds or borrowings that you issue from now on. Okay, so this might not be a huge, as in, depending on the situation you are in, this can be a good assumption or a bad assumption, but I hope you get the point. Okay, so what are guidelines for when to use the residual income model? So it is appropriate when a company does not pay dividends, or the dividends are not predictable, the company's cash flows are negative within the forecast horizon, there is uncertainty in forecasting terminal value using the various other cash flow or present value methods. Okay, so this is where to use it, and this is a high probability question about where to use this. I hope by now, since this is the last reading, so dividend discount model, free cash flow, there is the equity version and the firm version, and now you have residual income. So need to know where to use what. Okay, less appropriate when there are significant departures from clean surplus accounting. So if most of your equity is because of OCI, then even though you make adjustments, there might be some issues. The key RI determinants, such as book value and ROE, if they are not predictable in the future, then again this model is not good. Okay. Whenever you see this term international considerations, what is this, what should immediately? Yeah, immediately you should see accounting differences. There are other points also, but I think this is a common theme. Wherever you see international considerations, you need to realize that in different countries, potentially different accounting standards are being used. So in practice, to apply the residual income model most accurately, the analyst may need to, so you might have to make adjustments to book value. Like if you have a lot of operating leases, you might want to convert them into capital leases or finance leases. If there are discrepancies from fair value, what should you do? So if there is land that is valued at cost, and the land is actually 5 times more valuable in terms of fair value, what should you do? Use the book value per the balance sheet or the adjusted book value per your fair market value? Yeah, so you should use adjustments. Okay, if there is, you might have to make adjustments for amortization of intangible assets. You need to adjust the net income for clean surplus accounting, adjust reported net income for non-recurring items. So all the sorts of adjustments that we've talked about in FRA, you need to worry about those. Okay. Now all this is doing, I'll go through this fast. This is just building on the points that on the earlier slide I just gave you a summary. The next few slides are just giving what are the possible violations of clean surplus relationship. This point is just telling you what it is, which you know already. What are examples? Mark-to-market adjustments, foreign currency adjustments, pension adjustments. So you need to undo these, and not undo these, but show them as part of income. Okay. Balance sheet adjustments. So all we are saying, make adjustments to the balance sheet. So adjustments for inventory, deferred taxes, etc. So the curriculum doesn't get into too much detail. So I think if you do get a question on this, basically you need to recognize that adjustments have to be made, and you can do your FRA, use your FRA knowledge to figure out the adjustments. Intangible assets, specifically intangible assets that can be separated from the entity, should be included in book value. So sometimes are all intangible assets included in book value? Not necessarily. If a company has developed something in-house, it might not show that asset value on its books. Another company might have bought some intangible asset and then it shows it. So if you are doing a residual income analysis to compare the two companies, what should you do? You should make an adjustment so that the relevant intangible asset is shown as an asset on both sides. Okay, non-recurring items, what should you do with these? So in your future forecast of income, you should remove the non-recurring items. Okay, this is another comment on international. So internationally, if you are looking at companies in developing countries, then availability of reliable forecasts might be an issue. In some countries, if there are violations of the clean surplus assumption, that's a problem. If there are limited violations, that's good. Quality of earnings, what do you think the issue is here? So wherever you're doing an analysis, you need to look at the quality of earnings. Ideally, what do you want? You want high quality of earnings, which means low accrual ratios, right? Okay. So that is it. We have covered all the core points, and what you've studied here is good enough for you to do about 90-95% of what's in the curriculum.